Yes, we're recording. You can take it away, Michael.
All right, great. Well, thanks to for everybody for logging on today. We decided to cover the topic of kerfing and linings because that was something Ian said he was always interested in, and he was always questioning his methods when working at Breedlove. So I have invited two of my friends and favorite builders, Ryan Gerber and Isaac Jang, to join us today. And we each kind of do kerfing and linings differently. So I thought we'd start with Isaac because he does the most traditional kerfing, and Isaac could just sort of tell us about his materials and methods, and then we'll move on to Ryan, and then I would encourage questions at any time. So just unmute or raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we'll do it that way. So. Isaac, do you want to get started with talking about your approaches and thoughts to curving?
Of course. And now, is this the part where you want me to just kind of walk through what I do and talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Well, nice to meet you, everyone. I recognize some of you. Hey, Bo. Hey, Danny. Hey, Nate. And hey, everyone else. My name is Isaac Jang, guitar maker in LA. And I have... Okay, let me bring this over. I'm gonna switch my camera so that you can see better. I sort of try to do this with my, okay. Connected. All right, cool. So now I'm using my iPhone as my camera, remote camera. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So typically what I do, just bring this over. The way I install, sorry about the, let me just defend it aside real quick here. All right. So this is how I start. I have a reversed kerfing, reverse lining that I source from either LMI or the person who makes it for LMI. I believe his name is Tom Peterson. And this is what it looks like. So,
Isaac, is that do you use the Spanish cedar or mahogany?
this is Honduras mahogany, but he also makes it in cedar.
Okay.
So I use a sort of a full length and try to cut it to the exact length of the side assembly. And these are all the cutoffs that I keep around for any patchwork or small pieces or cutaway areas. And now let me switch to this side here. Sorry, I'm gonna, okay. Oh. Okay. Oh. Okay, there we go. Now this is a mold that I use. This is a style that is sort of made by Bob Mattingly. He's a classical builder, and this is what my mentor Kathy Wingard used. So this is what I use, and it's sort of a one-purpose use. I could get all the blocks in, laminate my sides with it, and install kerfing. Basically, do everything in one mold instead of having multiple molds to build side assembly. And part of the method that I use is, I'm just gonna use this as an example. I don't have a sides that are already bent yet, but if you imagine the sides being here, I can basically glue them in place with these plastic. All right, sorry. I'm having a little trouble with this one-handed, but so if you imagine me using this one plastic clamps and then just kind of install it all throughout, and I have a bucket full of clamps here, so I keep it alongside my mold, and as I'm installing it, I'm also pre-bending it with a heat iron, and I picked this up from just using watching Michael Greenfield's video. He was using it to pre-bend it, and it was sort of nicer to kind of give it a little bit of flex without, because a lot of the wood that I use, they tend to get older and dry out, so they crack easier, and it helps me to sort of keep them in shape a little bit easier, make them bend to shape easier, and then I move it over to this side, and I start to measure the length, and then I come and use my chisel and just break it and just keep it. Let me see if I can do it here. So I would bring it to my bench, and then I just get the measurement, and then just cut it clean and flush, and install from neck block to the end block. Sorry. And for the gluing method, I just use the Tide Bond and use this little sponge thing that I saw from Michael Greenfield's, and just kind of dab it on, boom, 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 boom.
Where do you get that little sponge thing?
I got it off of Amazon. I just had to look around, and then I found what looked exactly similar to what Michael had, and I just ordered it, and it was the exact same one that I saw. So I just ordered it. I'll find the link and then post it in the comments in your chat area. So,
and Isaac, I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. But one of the problems one of the issues with using the traditional kerfing is, the glue would often end up down inside the kerfs rather than on the surface of the wood. So using that little sponge applicator is a really nice way to keep it on the surface and out of the kerfs. So that's a great idea.
Thank you. Yeah, and I like to use just the right amount of glue, and it's kind of difficult, right? And I don't want to use too much, because then there's so much cleanup to do. And if I use too little, then there's not enough glue. So I have to sort of make sure I'm constantly using different lights, kind of coming at different angles, making sure everything is sort of locked in place. And if sometimes this plastic clamp is not enough of pressure, so I have to use then a little bit stronger clamp with this 2-inch pony clamp to sort of even lock it in place a little stronger. And that seems to be about as much I need. And because my mold has a rim that's about 1/2 inch thick, so it gives enough of the thickness to put that pressure. So that's pretty much how I do it. It's a very standard method. And sometimes if I break it, say if I'm working through and then it sort of cracked and it broke off, then I like to actually try to keep it really into one piece. So even on the top side or the back side, I want to make them look as clean as possible. So I typically glue them right back in place, but you still see that little line that it had a crack. So what I then do is use the remaining piece, bring it over here, and use a spoke shaver hand plane and shave off like a very thin piece of mahogany, and then glue it right back over, like a very thin, like a skin veneer of it, and just sort of blend it in so that it doesn't look like it broke. I mean, no one's really gonna see it, but I just kind of, as a peace of mind, and kind of that OCD kicks in, as you all experienced in your work. So that's and I think that's pretty standard method, but that's what I do.
Okay, Isaac, I've got a few questions for you about why do you like to use the reverse kerfing as opposed to the non-reverse kerfing?
Thank you for asking that. I've had different ideas about using the lining with the traditional, reversed, and solid lining, and they all seem to contribute a little bit difference in the sound because it has a different stiffness once they're added on. And with the traditional kerfing, the open on the other side, when you try to, I guess, twist or try to sort of work, kind of put some pressure on the rim, that seems to be the most flexible. And with the solid lining, it gives you the most stiffness. And I find the reversed is sort of somewhere in between, where it gives you enough of the stiffness, but it also has a little bit less in the weight and mass. So I thought that was sort of, and it also is easy to work with. So that's what I opted to use. And at this point, if I change one factor in the guitar, I feel like that's going to make a difference to sound. Um, but I find that's sort of just part of one of the factors that sort of builds up to the final result of the guitar. So that's pretty much the reason why I use it. And also it looks, to me, it looks cleaner finish than traditional. But I know the solid lining also has a very clean look to my eyes, but it's just something that I just kept using. So I'm just still using that.
All right. And what do you think? I know this is really hard to tease out, but say, all things being equal, if you had a reverse kerf, an open face kerf, and what do you think would actually be the difference in the end product of the guitar and the sound? And could you even, do you think it was something that a person could expect to hear?
Um, it would be very difficult to hear the difference unless you do an exact A to B comparison. But just the way I think in my head, I just sort of imagine things in my head a lot. And I think if I went looser on the rims, that probably gives a little bit more of I might lose a lot of the higher frequency per se in the trebles. And then if I went too tight, I'm just imagining here. So it's not really, it's just a guesswork. But I'm thinking if I went full solid, it might, I might get a too tight of a sound in the overtone because I guess the edges are a little bit too stiff for my style of building and voicing. So I'm just kind of thinking, so that's sort of a balance that I find works. But yeah, that's just my guess imagination.
All right. Yeah. Last question for you. And certainly if anybody has questions for Isaac as well, please chime in. But so on the back of the guitar, when you're dealing with the taper and the arch, the kerfing has to move almost in like a vertical plane, especially coming out of the waist and maybe around the cutaway. And with that style of kerfing you're using, it doesn't, move really up and down along its length. So
Right.
how do you coax the kerfing, to follow the arch and the taper of the back?
I sort of because the okay, there you go. Pull this out. Because it has a lot of curves in between, it still flexes a little bit this way or this way. Not a lot, but because of the length of it, if I stretch just a little bit throughout the whole thing, I can get it pretty close. It's not going to be exact thickness all throughout, but it gives me close enough that by the time I do sort of the final rim sanding, it looks balanced enough. So imagine this is the back from the end block. It's kind of coming this way, and then it sort of twists. I just broke it, but imagine it just kind of flexes. So as long as I keep it within a workable stretch, I can push it and just do it that way.
Okay. Yeah. That was something I always had I found a challenge of using more of the open face kerfing it seemed like it would want to kind of pinch or bind in certain spots and not really follow the side as well. We have a question from Ethan. Do you use vertical stiffeners as well?
Are you asking the side brace?
I think side braces, yeah.
No, because I laminate my sides, and I haven't found a need for using that. But if I were doing a single size, then definitely I would have using a side stiffener for it.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Isaac. Have you
Hi,
tried
Bob.
solid linings?
Have I tried solid linings? On a few occasions, excuse me, on a few occasions when I was working with Kathy, we've had to sort of use different parts, and those are my only experiences on the guitars.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Isaac before we move on to with Ryan?
I have a quick one, and I hope the background router noise isn't too crazy.
Nope, can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Do you ever find yourself like cutting into sections to work around the back radius, or do you just try and keep with the single continuous piece? Because often with that, I use the same kerfing, and I'll cut it in 3 different sections to sort of help that along.
I haven't done that yet, only because I like to challenge myself to try to keep the whole thing in one piece. But I mean, that would be a good idea to just kind of break it in and ease up. But I just always try to keep it in one piece, but sometimes it breaks. So I have to sort of patch areas. But yeah.
Okay, cool.
But I've seen other builders actually break it in pieces and then use more of a distinguishable veneers, like instead of mahogany, to really just blend it in, more like make it more stand out, like use like rosewood veneer to kind of say, hey, this is part of the feature. Hey, artistic features, boom, boom, boom. And I thought that was really cool. But I just haven't done that. Yeah, I haven't done that myself yet.
Cool.
All right, and now for something completely different. Ryan, you want to tell us about your methods and materials?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate the chance to be here and hang with you guys for a little bit. And ladies, if you're out there. I'm an Ohio guitar maker, and so I use solid lightings. At least I have been for the last, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years. And I also laminate my sides, so keep that in mind as well. And what I do is I start out just with I laminate 3 pieces of Peruvian walnut, 50 thou, 50 thou, 50 thou, sorry, 60, 60, and 60. And I laminate a 5-inch wide veneers. So I end up with a stack that's 5 inches wide, and first step is just to put a radius on each side to match the top. So I start with the top, which for me is 25 feet. So I just go to my my radius dish sander and put the 25-foot radius on this side, and then on the other side as well. And then go to the bandsaw and just set up a simple fence. This goes in the groove of the table, and it sets out from the blade a 1/2 inch, and then make that cut on each side of the veneer stack to get a left and a right for the top, and then and I'll do that twice. So out of one 5-inch stack, I can get enough for 2 guitars. So I do the top, get 2 sets of left and right for the top, and then I'll go back to the dish sander for my back, which is 15 feet, and radius it just ever so slightly more for the 15 foot, and then repeat the process to get 2 sets at the back. And so I am getting the radius at the top and the back, which that's nice, but with the back, I'm not getting the taper, or this way, right? Taper from tail block to neck block. So I have to fudge a little bit with that. The back I install, and I'll make a I make a 45-degree cut at about the apex of the lower bout on the back linings to shift them up just a little bit so that I get a better fit. Kind of like you guys were talking about with stretching the kerf linings. What else? For clamps, I use these little guys that I came up with. And this is a fun project. Stop me at any time here, Michael, if you want to. But
no, keep going.
Let me before I talk about the clamps, let me do one other thing. And I have a question for some of you. Maybe we can talk about this a little bit. But as far as notching linings into your tail block or neck block, I had a customer a couple years ago who sent a picture of one of my guitars, and in the tail block, on each side of the tail block, you could see reflection in the finish. It's a ever so slight little dimple where the lining would connect with the edge of the tail block. And I had seen this issue with other guitars, but that was the first time I'd seen it on one of mine. But it was enough to convince me to try and not let that happen again. So what I do now is I kind of strap if you can see, you can't really see the mark here, but from here to here, I rabbit the block. You can see here too. Rabbit the top and the bottom of the tail block, and then just do a strap over it to try and prevent that from happening. So I'm curious, have you all had guitars come back with that issue? Is that been a problem for anybody?
How
Go ahead, Isaac.
and I was wondering, you're talking about the dimple was significantly more on the end block, even if you kept it the same measurements as the kerfing?
No, it was only maybe a 1/4 inch long, but it was just right where the joint would be between the edge of the tail block and the line.
I see. I'm using the lining with the curves in there, so I try to keep it all consistent throughout all the edges. And when I do my end blocks, I also like to shave it down so that it matches to the width of the curving. And I haven't noticed the gap with the dimple showing up on the edge yet.
Ryan, I've definitely seen that before on production guitars, guitars of all makes. And I think I've seen it, especially when there's a gap between the end block and the kerfing. And so you have a little bit of unsupported top. I've never seen it in the back. And I've never seen it cracking or anything there. It's just, I think maybe it's the different woods moving at different rates in relation to the guitar settling in or humidity. But like you, I tuck my linings into a little pocket in the end block because I think it looks nicer. I think it avoids those dimples as well. So.
Yeah, and it's one of those small little details, right? I would say I'm pretty careful about, even before I was doing this strap over the top, pretty careful about getting as tight as possible. So I guess even within my own sort of tolerances, there's still there was still an issue, and so I guess I figured just better to come up with a fix to prevent any future problems. So, anyways, so the clamps that I use, I started out with, like everybody else, spring clamps. I had some plastic clamps with the rubber O-rings. Even tried, I'm sure, on my first few guitars, clothespins with as many rubber bands wrapped around as I could, and was just never really satisfied. I always felt like, man, there's got to be like a better clamping solution to this problem. Before I designed these plastic clamps, I had settled on 1-inch spring clamps, which worked well, but had a few drawbacks. They were too wide for me, I guess. When you have a tight curve, they didn't fit very well. On a spring clamp, you only have 2 pretty narrow points of contact, and it's easy for them to have the tendency of wanting to cause your linings to swim. If you don't have them balanced perfectly vertically, and you have one tip of the clamp higher than the other side, then it can want to kind of pull the lining up or push the lining down. So just, a minor inconvenience, but just something that you always had to pay attention to, getting the spring clamp just right so that it didn't want to pull the lining. And they're pretty heavy when you get a full the full perimeter lined with clamps, and then you're handling the guitar, you're trying to clean it up. It's just kind of heavy. So anyhow, with all those thoughts in mind, I thought, forgive me if I'm rambling on too long about this, but
No, this is great.
I was just kind of thinking, man, in a factory setting where people are doing linings all day, if that's their job and that's what they're doing, what would the ideal situation look like? What would the ideal clamp look like? And so just with that thought in mind, partly just as kind of a thought experiment, and just wanting to tinker and try and develop something, this is what I came up with. So it's just, and also I saw a video. What really spurred this on was I saw a video about the topic of flexures and compliant mechanics. There's a professor from BYU University who is kind of one of the leaders in developing compliant mechanisms in engineering for all sorts of industries, from NASA to electronics and circuit boards, and there's all kind of applications for these devices called compliant mechanics that are based on flexures. So the idea is that anywhere you would normally have a joint where you have a fastener to hold that joint in place, instead it just has a flexible part of the material that's thin enough so that it can bend and move. And whatever the mechanism is, it's all made out of one piece of material. Anyhow, so I saw that video. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Maybe I could use that idea. So just came up with this, and it's real simple. You just push the jaws together, the flexures bend. To clamp, you just push down, and it pushes the jaws out, and then the little hooks lock into place so that it can't pull back out. And then to release, you just pinch the little locking clamps together, and it pops up, and then you just slide the clamp right off. So in my mind, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask. At some point, could you run us through how you're making those?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But continue with your thought as well. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So yeah, they're super lightweight. Fix that problem. They have more than enough clamping force. A device like this with these little flexures, they're only 20 thousandths thick, but the amount of force that they can push out with and hold, it's pretty impressive. So So yeah, they have more than enough clamping force. They have almost as much as a 1-inch spring clamp.
Are you just 3D printing those?
No, these are milled on I have a CNC router, and I mill them with a 16th inch single flute mill. And I made I have a fixture base where I load in strips of this, and they're made out of polypropylene. So I have a fixture plate where I load in strips of polypropylene that are just a little bit wider than this, and clamp the plastic down with clamps, and then I can mill 60 clamps per run on the fixture plate. So I could probably go on and on and on for quite some time about what the process was like to try and optimize and figure out how to mill them without too many problems. It was a real learning experience for me, just to try and develop something that you make hopefully thousands of. It's totally different than just making a one-off of something. So.
And Ryan, am I correct? You're selling those clamps? You sell them?
I do, yeah. I've made a handful of sets for builders.
Okay.
No factory orders yet, but maybe soon.
All right. Maybe you don't want factory orders. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I couldn't handle that, but
yeah. And so have you applied that type of technology to anything else in guitar building? That can't remember what you called it, the flexural.
Yeah, I do play mechanics. I have just the other day. I did another one. I'll be right back. Let me go grab it. So I tend to get fixated on these little parts of the guitar making process where I feel like this just isn't, I'm not enjoying this, or this is too hard, or it should be easier, there should be a better way, and I get sidetracked for days on an idea. But anyhow, I was doing sound hole binding on one of my guitars, just the little thin veneer that I do on the inside of the sound hole, and certainly not a hard thing to do if you're just using your hands and super glue or taping it in there. But anytime you're trying to fix veneer to the inside, to an ID, to the inside of a sound hole or rosette or whatever you're making, it's a little harder than wrapping veneer on the outside. So with the idea of flexures and compliant mechanics in mind, I just did this little guy here, which is, so this is a metal taper pin from MasterCar, only like $4, and polypropylene. And the idea is just that it just expands and contracts as you move the taper pin through the center. Way over engineered. I know it's probably ridiculous.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea.
Again, the thinking being, as far as clamping the joint, it has full clamping surface on the veneer. You're not using your finger where you're kind of maybe pulling over the edges and it's not getting the center, or I don't know. There's different thoughts you can have, but easy to use, and yeah, I'll enjoy doing it when it comes time for that part of the process. So.
All right. And like with the clamps, you think you'll have those for sale, or is that just a one-off for you?
If somebody wants me to make one for them, I'm happy to. I don't have any.
Put me down. Put me down for one.
Okay.
That's a great idea.
Dion saw it and thought that was pretty cool, and he asked me to make one for him, so I was going to make one.
Okay.
Ryan, what is the how far can it expand
for the sound hole deal? I think I set it to be about 20 thousandths 40 thousandths diameter under, at the very short, small end of the taper pin, and then it's 40 thousandths over diameter at the long end of the taper pin. So you'd have 80 thousandths diameter working range.
Oh, okay. Is that okay? Does that mean it's 40 thousandths out from the center in all directions, not 80 thou in every
Right. So yeah, the idea is just that I made it in the middle of the taper pin would be what your finished, you know, when you're gluing your veneer on the inside of the sound hole would be.
Yeah.
Your actual dimension there would be. Yeah.
And Ryan, we've got a question from the chat from Ethan. It says, do you use only Peruvian walnut no matter what the back and side wood choices are?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. And how did you come to use Peruvian walnut versus some other wood?
So I also use it for the inside lamination on my sides. Peruvian walnut is relatively lightweight. The supply where I get it from, I'm fortunate to live pretty close to a place called Kine Lumber here in Ohio, and they have a lot of Peruvian walnut and really nice Peruvian walnut, and it's fairly priced, so it's, you know, it's not super expensive, it's lightweight, and it's really easy to resaw on the bandsaw, so it's easy to work with. It's stable, it bends well. Yeah, it's just
Okay.
seems to have all the good qualities for.
And what do you like about, say, solid linings versus more traditional kerfing?
Well, first I'll say I like Isaac's thinking of being in the middle. I think it's good to be in the middle. I like averages. I think that's really smart thinking. Not too stiff, not too loose. But I like solid linings because I like having the extra stiffness on the rim. To me and my thinking and my goals for the guitar, I like what having a really stiff rim does tonally for the guitar. So I'm okay going that extra step to, you know, beyond just having laminated sides to having the solid lines as well. I'm okay with that. And hopefully I'll make up for any extra amount of brightness or tightness in the guitar, make up for that elsewhere, to get back to a nice balance. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
They're easy to work with. You know, they're really easy to make. It doesn't take much time to have two sets ready to go. And as far as when it comes time to actually install them, it's really easy. You know, because they're already more or less formed to the shape of the guitar. It's about, you know, it's maybe a 15-minute process to once I have them in strips like this, you know, 15 minutes to put them on the guitar, mark them, cut them, fit them, and glue them in place. So,
Okay. And what kind of glue are you using to put them in?
just tight bond.
Okay.
And unlike Isaac, I lathered on there pretty heavy, and then just clean it up.
Yeah.
How do you cut those strips in half again? Maybe I might have missed that part, because you make them into a bigger block or strips, and then you say you split or cut them.
Yeah, so I start out with a wider. Now this has already had the top, the linings for the top cut out of it, but I do it on the bandsaw. So after the radius is on each side of the stack, then I put a fence on the bandsaw. You know, if you imagine this is groove of
okay.
bandsaw. table, a
Mhm.
half inch away from the blade.
Mhm.
And then the stack, as I'm running it through the saw,
Mm.
is registering against the fence.
Mhm.
So you end up with, the radius on both sides of the strip.
Nice. And okay, got it. Yeah, cool.
Ryan, do you measure that? You said half inch. Do you measure that with a ruler, or do you just kind of say, yeah, that's pretty much half an inch?
Yeah, it's just pretty much.
Yeah, that's what I do.
About this much.
Good enough's good enough.
Yeah, a half inch. Yeah, I don't think that if you have a good joint with your linings and the linings are solid, and I mean, I really don't think you'd need more than a quarter inch of height on the lining.
Yeah. Lutes don't have any, so you don't need any technically.
Yeah. I remember reading in a GAL article many years ago that Richard Schneider would just take a bead of epoxy and run it along the joint between the top and the side, or maybe it was the back and the side. I don't remember. And I think he did it with a marble, so it would kind of have a cove to it. And that was essentially his lining and his method of gluing the top to the rim.
Wow.
So, all right. Any? Mhm.
Did he bind after doing that?
I don't know.
You have to have thin bindings to do that.
Yeah. I don't know. Don't remember. So, any other questions for Ryan at this point? All right. Well, I'll show you how I do my linings. There's some similarities to, let's see. Oh, there we go. I use solid linings like Ryan, and there's some similarities, a few differences. So I'll move through this kind of quickly. But so I start with 3 strips of wood. I do 50 thousandths on each strip. Just visually, I thought that the 180 linings, in addition to the sides, were just giving me more gluing surface than I needed. So I've thinned them out. And these are Cortison sycamore. I've done it with cherry. I've done it with mahogany. And I've also done it where the middle layer, I'll use a contrasting wood. So you get a nice visual effect. Like you get kind of a racing stripe inside the perimeter of the guitar. And I will bend these up all at once on my side bender. I'll bend all 3 at once. I don't use a whole lot of water. I just need to get them rough into shape. And then I'll take those 3 linings, and I've got this male female mold that has the shape of the lining, and these cutouts are for my clamps to grab, and each one of these is basically across from a flat on the outside of the mold, so I can get really nice even clamping pressure. And I've used Titebond before. I've also tried a laminating glue, which I feel like is a little bit stiffer than and more rigid than the Titebond. I think it's Unibond is the name of the glue that I've been using. And then those come out of the mold. It looks something like this, much wider. I've already cut off a piece. And then for the tops of my guitars, it's a 50-foot radius, so it's fairly flat. So I just keep those straight. I don't put any arch or taper in them. But for the backs, I have a 15-foot radius, and there's a fair taper between the neck block and the end block. And I guess my method differs from Ryan's in that I do put the taper into the lining. So how I do that is I'll take my lining after it comes out of the mold, and I'll put it in this template, and then I'll trace a line on the outside, and this will give me the arch and the taper. Whoops, sorry, I'm holding it upside down. Here you can see the arch and the taper of the back. And then I'll take it out of the mold and I'll cut and hand plane down to that line. And then this is my jig that goes on the bandsaw, and I run the lining along this. And I really want to put a little motor on this and have it spin, but I don't have time. But anyway, that would be the ultimate representation of this jig. And so with this fence, it'll give me a line parallel to that line that has the arch and the taper. And so I'll do that for the backs, and again for the tops, I'm just cutting off straight strips. And then I've got, this is what the product looks like, except I'll take a 1/4 inch round over bit, and I'll round over this top side of the lining, and that just gives me a nice look inside the guitar as opposed to it just being squared off. And I have a like Ryan, or excuse me, like Isaac on my mold. You can see I have a raised ledge here, and that's what I clamp to. And again, it has the arch and the taper, and so that's what I do with to install the linings right into the mold. And then I use these clamps, these little C clamps. I don't know where you could get these anymore. I kind of inherited these from another builder. But what I like about these is because they don't have the big handle, I can pack these in really tight and get a lot of clamps with not putting a lot of pressure on each one, but have really even pressure along the lining. I just use Titebond, and because I have a solid surface here, I don't have to worry about glue getting down into all the kerfs, and I find it's also easy to clean up. And I use one of Ryan's little luthier hose to do it, and I'll just clean up the bead with that luthier hoe right up along here, and I don't have any kerfings to worry about, smearing glue or pushing the glue around. And as far as the process goes, that's about it. I do, on my end blocks, I do run the linings into these notches, and then the top of the block is also relieved so that I kind of have a continuous footprint around the entire perimeter of the guitar, so the end block isn't coming out any further than the lining is. And what else can I tell you about them? I use a fairly wide binding, so most of the time I'm routing all the way through my side to cut the binding ledge, and I just feel better about routing into something like this as opposed to a kerfed lining. I should say that I'm not using laminated sides, so with the single side, this gives me something solid to route into. And I also feel like with the single sides, I'm really benefiting from the stiffness, the added stiffness of the solid lining. And I also, for me, I think tonally, it's been an improvement in my guitars. I couldn't, if I was wearing a blindfold, I don't know that I could tell you the difference between one guitar to the next as to what type of kerfing or lining it had in it. But like Isaac was saying, it's just kind of one piece to the puzzle. So I like how it looks. I like the custom that I can, make it custom. I could use any type of different wood. I can put different layers in there. I can make it different sizes. And so that's why I do it. I've thought about in the past trying to make it out of one solid piece and either heat bending it, but I think laminating three pieces, it's very stable and it stays the exact shape of the side. So, and I did for many years use regular kerfings, and I don't know. I just always felt like I had some problems getting the kerfing to follow the taper of the back, and they were always splitting on me. And I wasn't smart enough to figure out what Isaac did, which was to put a little mahogany patch in there. So now you tell me, Isaac. But anyway, any questions about that?
I figured I'll just ask a question instead of making you read my question. Is nobody using vacuum clamps for the linings?
Did you say vacuum clamps?
Yes,
And do you mean to install the lining itself or to make the lining?
to make the lining, the laminated lining.
Yeah. I am not using a vacuum. I've it could certainly work. I don't know that it would work any better than a well-made male-female mold, but I think it's definitely, yeah, it would be a perfectly fine way to do it. I think really that's a question for Ryan and Isaac. Are you guys using vacuum to glue up your sides?
No, I'm just using my sticks and using the mold like clamps. But I just visited my friend Leo Buendia, and he was using a vacuum setup, and that looked fairly simple. He had a bag and turn on and set things up with a few different layers of sort of pads and turn it on and boom, 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 and it's all in there. So I'm sure if I had it set up, I'd probably use it. But for the time being, I'm just okay using it. But also I do a lot of sort of twisting on my rims. So if I wanted to use a vacuum, then I needed like a perfect mold to kind of keep everything in shape. But because I'm sort of twisting a lot of things for my cutaways, I just kind of do it just by feel a lot of times.
Mm.
I don't use a vacuum either. I just use a AB mold setup.
And to whoever asked the question, are you using a vacuum mold?
This is Ethan Hughes. Yeah, I use I just started using one, and I had a little bit of an issue with the first sides that I laminated together. I wasn't getting like a great vacuum, but then I realized I had a little bit of a leak. But once I got the leak cleared, it the second set was really good. For the AB mold, are you having like a 60 thou clearance between the two? I don't know how to ask that really. Is the mold an exact mold, or do you have a space between where the side would sit or the kerfing would sit?
For me, I have an allowance for the width of the linings.
Yeah.
So, and if I was laminating sides, I would make an allowance for the side as well, I would think.
Gotcha.
Yeah, for me, my molds are made to exact tolerances, and then I have, assuming just the end thickness of the sides and the linings, and then I just use a caul or an insert. If I'm gluing sides up, I have an insert that is basically, it's just a replica of my linings. So 180 thousandths stack insert that would take the place of the linings. If I'm gluing up my sides, then if I'm gluing up linings, then I have just an insert that is the same as the thickness of the sides.
Cool.
And mine is kind of not exact AB, but you can see my molds, and then these are my side form cauls. So I'm actually, these are more of a caul than a form. So AB, but this is basically what I do, and I just install it all throughout. And for me, that gives me flexibility with different thickness of the sides, because sometimes if I'm using a set of Ashcan Blackwood that are much heavier than a set of Brazilian, then I can go a little bit thinner, but it will still give me enough of, basically I can clamp it without having to worry about leaving gaps in a exact AB mold.
Hey, Michael, do you mind if I interject another kind of lining?
Oh, please do.
So I learned from Charles Fox. That's where I learned to build guitars, and I built his linings. I'm actually in process of building another run of them right now, and it's kind of a combination of the two things you've talked about today. So here's my linings. And if you get, let me see if I can get an end view for you. So you can see there's a little rabbit in my linings. And I don't know if you can see this, but I curve the end. So this is the downside here. And then I cut a 16th insert that goes within that rabbit. So the way that I install these, I'm installing the lining solid side in, so it's more of a standard lining. And then once that's in, I'm bending the 16th insert and gluing that in afterwards. So it's kind of a compound lining. So in the end, you get a sandwiched lining that's solid on the inside, solid on the outside, and curved in the middle.
That's like a mini structured side or something. Like a miniature structured side, like some of the guys that are doing that lining, that's the whole.
Right. Well, and it makes it so it's solid enough that once I put the lining in, I can pull it out of my mold, and I don't use the mold anymore. I can take it out of the mold. I can put the radius on it. It's solid enough to radius it outside the mold. So that's what I really like about it, is once I put this in, it's a solid, the sides are solid, and I'm not using a laminated side.
I was going to say solid sides.
David, have you used solid lining before? Like a fully solid lining?
I haven't done a full solid lining. And mostly because this gives me the ability to change sizes at will on my guitar side. So I also, I don't have solid molds. I use adjustable molds. So any change I want to make in a guitar, I can make it, which also allows me to make any change in the kerfing as I go.
And David, how do you deal with the arch and the taper of the back? Do you have some vertical flex in that lining?
I don't have, I've tried it. I don't have much flex, but I make a big enough lining that I can radius down and still have plenty of meat left over, you know, so it's a little thicker in places and a little thinner in places. And really, I'm the only one who notices that in the process. And in the end, it looks really nice inside because I've got the curve in there and I really have the control over making it pretty in there. And the solid inside, really, I like the look of the solid, just like your solid linings. I like that you see a nice solid piece of wood in there. So it doesn't seem necessary to me at this point. I haven't run into a case where I've run out of lining or had too little anywhere. So
okay. And are you just making the kerf cuts on the table saw, or how are you doing?
No.
Those?
So I'm still in process. I actually learned from Charles the way he does it, and I've built the system to do it. I picked up an old 1950s DeWalt radial arm saw for $50. And the problem I'm having with it is there's no brake on it. So I'm in the process of building an electronic brake to slow down the blades, but I have 5 blades with spacers on them. And then I have a jig that holds down the kerfing as I go. And I just run through and do gang cuts 5 at a time and then slide it further. And I have a little registration pin that registers on the last kerf I had. So I just move it down and slide it through again. Like I said, the only problem I'm having right now is with the weight of the 5 blades and the spacers on there. It takes forever for that saw to wind down each time. And I can't run it back through while it's still spinning. It tears out some of the kerfing. So I looked online and there's a company making a brake for it, but it's $900 for the stupid brake, and I spent $50 on the saw. So
Sure.
there's a guy online who designed an electronic brake, and I have all the parts. That's not my forte, so I've been working on getting it built. So
Okay. Nice. And what species of wood are you using for the
cedar?
Okay.
These are cedar linings, but I could use, I mean, it doesn't really matter, whatever is. I have a good local hardwood store in Reno. I live up by Lake Tahoe, and whatever they have in stock that's decent wood for me to use, if it was mahogany or cedar or whatever, I just want something that's not too heavy. But
yeah,
it doesn't much matter. I mean, right now I still had a huge run of cedar left, and I've got probably, I don't know, 24 of the basic stick of this sitting there getting ready to be kerfed, and I'll end up with 4 or 5 guitars worth when I'm done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the little at the bottom of the kerf cuts, how thick are you leaving that to give you the flexibility that you want?
Not much. I mean, there's probably between a 16th and a 32nd down there. I mean, it's pretty darn thin. Here, I'll give you a side view. I mean, this is super thin. That's what I'm left with.
Gotcha.
These are probably a little on the thin side. I would go a little thicker than this one, but I've also tried bending them, and I've bent them in my side bender before I put them in, and I found it's just easier for me. These bend enough that I can do most of the bending just with the straight kerfing. Occasionally, where in a tight turn, I'll put it on the bending iron, and then I've been hand bending the insert because it's so thin. It's like super easy to run this across the bending iron and just get it perfect when you put it in.
Yeah, well, that's a really nice idea. It reminds me of 2 other types of kerfings that haven't come up, and one is the A4 kerfing that Kevin Ryan makes, which I have tried in the past, and I know some builders really like. And its unique feature is that it does have the vertical bending to it. So it makes it really nice and easy to install. Does anybody use that kerfing or have any experience with it?
I did try it at one point, and the flexibility in both axes was really cool.
Mhm.
It's really easy to work with, but I didn't like how chippy it was. You'd have little corners break out when you're cutting your notches for your braces, and I was always finding myself always having to, try and super glue little chips back in, and that had broken off. And also I kind of shifted away from shifted towards wanting a more stiff, adding more stiffness to the rim. So
Yeah. Okay.
it's an amazing,
And then,
amazing product that he's able to make that.
yeah, I can't remember. Does he cut those on a laser? Is that how those are made?
I believe so.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's how he makes them. The only problem I saw with them when I looked at them was it adds no structural stability whatsoever, which is kind of the beauty of the thing for installation, but it doesn't add anything other than gluing surface later.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a good point, David, in that I think there is a whole way of thinking about linings and kerfings, which is that their only job is to provide gluing surface. Yeah, I think Kevin's would be an example, but also to a certain extent, in the classical world, the use of the tentillones, which are just individual blocks that are not connected to each other. And that seems like it's hard for me to imagine that adding much structure at all to the rim. But adding glued surface, I know Bruce Sexauer uses that method.
Yeah, he uses tentillones, and he doesn't use molds
Yeah.
either.
Okay, and then also Rosie Haydenrick uses the tentillones, and I don't personally have any experience with them, but I know both of those builders feel like it's part of the voice of their guitars in terms of how close they place the blocks together, what species they use, etc. So, Anybody here have any experience using the Tentallones?
I'll just jump in as well. I have not used them, but in Samoji's book, he uses sort of tentallones on his top. Did you notice that? But he uses small offcuts of reverse curve lining on the top.
Hmm.
He calls them.
I don't know if that's still what he does.
Yeah,
But I've spoken to a few classical builders, and part of the reasons was the tradition, the way they build it on Solera, because they had to build a guitar upside down, and sort of part of the method comes because you have to basically glue the whole thing upside down, and you can't really install with the lining sanded and then glue it. You basically just glue each pieces together inside. But that also, I'm sure, has a sonic effect from that. So, for what it's worth.
All right. Any other thoughts, comments?
Yeah, as building first acoustic guitars. So, are there any tips or tricks for installing sort of either solid or kerf lining you've got for somebody that's going to do it? And then follow-up question was, I'm building a very small guitar. Do you think you would change your lining for stiffness and things depending on the size of the guitar as to what you wanted to achieve to like stiffen things up, or like you were saying, reduce highs, increase lows, or tighten up lows, or whatever?
It's hard to say for this, I guess, for the sonic influence. It's kind of hard to say because there's so many other factors that come into play. But I think if you're building your first guitar, I would probably try it out and see what works best for you. Yeah, no, it's just only because, yeah.
It always seems to be just try it and figure it out and find out.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the traditional ones you can try because it still is a perfectly good lining that's been used for hundreds of years. I don't know hundreds of years, but many years, and it's been proven tried and true. So I'm sure it works just fine, and then make changes from there and see how that goes. Yeah, that's what I would personally recommend.
Yeah.
Andy, I would also just mention, I think heat bending the kerfings first, just no matter what kind of kerfings you're using, just to put a little bend will really help keep them from breaking as you're installing them. And okay. When I used more traditional kerfing, I would kind of glue it and clamp it in sections, as opposed to putting glue on the entire strip and then trying to clamp it in. So I'd say try either way and see what works for you.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is that all of the ones we've talked about today, including mine, all add stiffness to the guitar. Reverse kerfing, a solid lining, and the one I have with the multi-layer all add stiffness to the guitar. Generally, tentallones and standard kerfing do not add a lot of stiffness. I mean, there's another layer of wood in there, but because the kerfing is facing in, or there is no kerfing in the tentallones case, there is no structural benefit or much structural benefit to either of those. Whereas the solid linings and reverse kerfing all add a huge structural change to the rim of the guitar.
Yes, and I would say that many successful guitars have been built both ways. So I don't I don't think one way is clearly better than the other.
I'm not saying better than the other. I was just pointing out that there is a structural difference between the two that changes the nature of the rim of the guitar. It's not better or worse. It's just a fact that there is a different structure because of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't think you go for a more solid lining in a larger guitar than to sort of tighten things up over in a smaller guitar to maybe open things up and make things move a bit more? Does it change the volume of it, I suppose, is the easiest question.
I see what you're saying, and I understand that line of thinking, but I don't. For me, I think about it a little differently in that, you know, I want a stiff rim, and if I want to loosen things up, I'll do it in the top around the perimeter of the plate, rather than thinking that I want to loosen up the sides itself. And for me, I think there's a benefit to having some additional mass right along the edge of the top. I've found that that actually doesn't tighten things up. It actually opens up the low end of the guitar. Just my 2 cents, things, everybody's experience will be different about that. So, but that's how I think about it.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Mm.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Well, if you also think about that, the top and the back are the pumping surfaces for the guitar, right? As the air flows in and out, it's the top and back that are moving in and out and have that motion to move the air. The sides really don't help with that much. So there's not a whole lot of necessity in the sides moving or not moving. It doesn't really, it's the front and the back where the amplification happens.
Very true. And I think along those lines, I guess along my lines of thinking is I'm trying to limit energy transfer from the top or the back into the sides. I kind of want the solid linings to form a hard stop there, so to speak.
Michael, can I ask you a question concerning solid linings and single sides?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I've got a cold. You know how some guitars crack along the bottom edge of the kerfing along the side? Are you concerned about that with your ultra stiff solid linings against the single sides?
Yes. Next question. No, I do. It is a concern. If the guitar were to take an impact on the side, that seems like it would be the most likely spot where it would split. I do put in a fair number of side braces to hopefully reduce any runs of cracks if it does happen. So, but my main reason for staying away from laminated sides, and first I should say that I think there's some real benefits to laminated sides. I think there's some real reasons to use them, and only a few not to use them. But one of those reasons for me is just I like the physical vibe of a lightweight guitar, and doing a laminated side, it'll make a heavier guitar, at least the way I was doing it. So,
did you try this the other way, like the full kerf one?
the structured sides. Yeah, I've never tried that.
Yeah, I've not tried them both.
Yeah, it looks interesting, but I've not tried it.
As an interesting side note, I just had a conversation with Bruce Saxauer. We're part of the same luthier group in Northern California, and he's moved away from wood side bracings. He uses fabric side bracings, and really only as a stopgap for a crack, not to try to prevent a crack. He just feels that you can't prevent cracks in the side. If they're going to happen, they're going to happen. All he wants to do is keep it from running further down the side.
Do you know what glue he's using for the fabric?
No, I'll have to go back and ask him about that. I had started looking at the fabric, and the fabric he's using is I forget what it was, but when I looked it up, it all had printing on it. It was like regular fabric from the fabric store, and I just couldn't bring myself to put these ugly fabrics inside my guitar. So I just gave up on the thought. But it was interesting to hear his thought process that really the wood that you put in the sides was not preventing. He didn't feel it was preventing a crack.
Yeah.
So he didn't
Well,
feel it was necessary as far as structure. He wanted something in there to stop a crack, but he didn't want the extra weight of the
mhm.
wood.
Yeah. Well, certainly, Doug, are you around? I have a question for you if you are, but most of the older Martins and even a lot of the newer Martins I've worked on have used fabric side braces. And yeah. Oh, Doug, do you know much about the history of the use of fabric side braces in Martin guitars, like when it started and
I don't have a perception of the exact date they started it. Obviously, it was to prevent side cracking or to help the perception that it would prevent side cracking, and I think most of those guitars prior to the use of any kind of ribbon, and it was just a ribbon, it was nothing special about it. But most of the guitars that preceded the use of that stuff, if they caught, a coffee table or the end of anything hard, just right enough, you would have a guitar that would pop, that would become two guitars right down the center of that, and it would go run right around. And so that, the whole use of that kind of a sidelining thing is something that I've seen guys who build guitars recently that decided not to use them because they didn't want to add so much weight to a guitar, so they didn't use wood, and they opted for nothing, and then had that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember exactly what date they started using them. Off the top of my head.
Okay.
So-
And
Ask a question.
please.
Doug, in your experience there, you would say that the fabric has a substantial effect on preventing cracks from running?
Oh yeah, it does, definitely. I mean, some of the the old way they used to do it was basically just saturate that thing with glue and just lay it in place.
Yeah.
And that stuff got super stiff once the glue dried. And I've had a number of guitars that have come in over the years that whenever we're working on an old guitar that has ribbon lining, and you get a crack that will typically stop from one piece of lining to the next, or there were some, depending on which model of the guitar, sometimes you'd see fewer linings and farther spaced apart, depending on how old it is or what model of guitar it was. And there have been times where we're repairing a side crack that just the ability to put in an additional one here or there just to be able to help, hold that crack shut rather than put in a piece of wood does wonders to the stiffness of the side of the guitar and holds that stuff together.
So you don't see any downside between using wood and using fabric there then?
I actually think, I personally, just from the standpoint, as a recovering guitar builder, I think it's hipper. I like the cloth linings because it's I haven't noticed that wood gives me any huge benefit in preventing a crack other than the fact that it's running cross grain. I'll reserve judgment on terms of what it's adding in terms of weight or tone and all of that stuff. But I actually do have a question for the whole group, if everybody wanted to chime in, as it related to stuff like, it's more of a philosophical question, like I said, as a recovering guitar builder. Thinking about the process of building a guitar, the thousands, if not tens of thousands of decisions you have to make, especially as you're going to pursue, your own model of guitars, or models, your offerings to the guitar world. How does each one of you approach the process of making a decision about something as seemingly remote as kerfing to this is the way I'm going to do it, and this is why. Because it seemed to me that the thing I always struggled with when I was building guitars was that you could, more than two decisions that change from one guitar build to the next, the ability to judge how much of this is responsible for that or that is responsible for this, beyond two factors in the change of a guitar build, it becomes virtually, to me anyway, it felt like it was undeterminable what was responsible. So if you're talking about making decisions as you go, choices of woods, changing your bracing, changing, the thickness of a side or the depth of a side, to changing your kerfing, the thousands of decisions you make, I would be curious how each one of you came to the process of choosing your varied different approaches to, or choices for using kerfing that you did. Was it methodical in the sense of you've always done it this way, and then you took a build and you said, this one I'm going to do that way, that one I'm going to do this way. I'm going to compare the two and then make a decision quantitatively? Or was it more, I saw him doing that and I did it and I really liked it? I mean, you can go round robin. You can start with Michael.
Oh, okay. Well, I've kind of done a mixture of all of the above. I've changed how I do it quite a bit over the years, and usually if I make a big switch, like if I go from a reverse kerf to a solid lining, I will build several guitars the new way, and then so rather than just having one data point on one guitar, I feel like I've done it on several guitars and be able to kind of capture the variation and then make a judgment as to whether that change was worthwhile. But you're absolutely correct in that even if we were, it's hard not to change more than one thing on a guitar at a time. So the usefulness of the information from guitar to guitar is somewhat limited. And it's limited even further that we can't change just one thing from guitar to guitar because the materials that are being used is always changing as well, which may swamp out any factor that or information you hope to gain from making a change. So for me, I've tried to be quantitative about it, but admit that sometimes it's just I like the way that looks, so I'm going to do that.
Who wants to go next?
And in my case, big part of what I started when I first built my guitar that I put it on the market, because I come from a apprenticeship, so whatever my mentor Kathy did, I sort of inherited a lot of her thought process, and then from there I refined and made changes to my liking and to what worked better for me. Even a lot of the small components that really comes from what I was taught at the training, and then anything from there, if I want to change bracing, designs and components, then I just make small changes and then start here for the guitar, make changes from the next one. So for me, it was very small changes each guitar. And that kind of helped me to see, okay, so when I did this, it made that difference, and I was able to make a decision from there. So I never really made a big change at once. It was usually small changes.
So you took the standpoint that, or the process that you had a guitar that you were building, and when you made a decision, it was a small change, like say maybe going from this kerfing to that type of kerfing, and then you were able to stand back and go, that's it made this difference, or it made no difference at all, or
Yeah.
or or it was an impressive enough difference that you said, I want to do it this way from here on forward because it was either easier or it sounded better or it produced a better result or.
Mhm.
That's interesting.
And then part of the, and then I think related to the side the curving, my first guitar that I was building with my mentor was a single-sided guitar, and the difference that I felt was not just the sound in itself, but it was the way the guitar felt. And when I played a guitar that had single sides, that sort of reminded me more of like older instruments like Martin's, where you feel the instrument as a whole. Whereas if I played a laminated size, it felt a little bit more like the top and the back had a lot more of the movement going on there.
Mhm.
And I kind of wanted to find a balance in between that, because if I went too far, then it almost felt like I'm not really getting a feedback from the instrument in itself, but whether for the audience to hear better, maybe. So I kind of wanted to, but I still wanted to have a stable sides for my guitars. So I went for laminating the sides, but to make that closer resemblance to a single size, I started to work with the thickness of the sides and my inner sides, material choices, curving. So I started to, work through all of those details and
Mhm.
trying to find what worked best for me.
Cool, very cool. Thank you. Ryan, you want to chime in on that at all, or?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about it. We're thinking just about the rim, parts and pieces that pertain to the rim, linings, sides, neck block, tail block. My thinking and approach has been just to think of it just in terms of from an engineering perspective, and that it's just only a structural component. It's a structural. It's the foundation for the guitar to be connected to. And so choosing solid linings is just following that line of thinking. Laminated sides, following that line of thinking. The neck block design that I use, which is was inspired by a builder named Burton Leggett. I never know how to pronounce his last name, but sorry, Burton, if you're listening. But he does something like this.
Mm-hmm.
You can see with extensions far out, a few inches out to either side of the neck block, and it's all just with the goal of limiting the amount of twist that can happen in the rim.
Right.
I think neck resets are going to be, should not be an issue with if you have a rim that is stiff enough to not twist and buckle.
Okay. To a degree, I.
Now that's assuming that the top is built within reason, right? The soundboard is made.
Right. I mean, if you got a top that bellies up and you got a back that flattens over time, those are both going to have impacts on you having to reset a neck on a guitar, no matter what guitar it is. No? Am I wrong?
Well, I guess my thought is, I mean, you have to be right to some extent. I just think that if the rim is really incapable of flexing, if you're incapable of flexing, buckling in this way and twisting, I mean it's if nothing else, it's going to really do a considerable amount of good in preventing.
Sure, that's a considerable amount of preventive structural stability towards that. I would definitely agree there. So back to my question about making those decisions. On the rim you just held up there, there's a lot going on there that are a series of decisions, whether it's, the way you have your neck block or the lining or, all of that stuff. How did you go about your discovery process of determining which was going to be the next change and whether or not that kind of a thing would be a valuable enough change to keep. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. I think it's just my process is just thinking, what is my ideal guitar? What is the best guitar that I can make according to my own ideas of what a guitar should be or could be, and then just out of all the options, just picking the one that makes the most sense.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of a cop-out answer, I feel like.
No,
but,
it's not a cop out at all.
uh,
I've always been curious of that process because those kind of decisions are one of the reasons why I stopped building guitars.
But I think the rim and what we're talking about here, as far as linings in the rim, is unique from soundboard bracing or voicing the soundboard or making choices, making decisions that have to do, that are a little bit more abstract, like what your bracing layout is, or you can do a lattice bracing or a tone bar lattice, whatever. I mean, those are decisions that maybe involve a little bit more abstract thinking and.
Sure. Yeah. And in some ways are outside of what you're talking about in terms of structural integrity.
Right,
In some ways are more impactful on the end result or the noticeable result of the guitar.
Yeah. When it comes to the rim, my thinking is pretty linear. It's just like structural, what's going to build a stiff rim and be still relatively easy to produce and put together without going over the top. Still be fun to make.
Cool.
You know, Doug, I think you could almost reverse that question towards yourself.
Yeah.
So I lived in Santa Cruz for a long time. You can't throw a rock without hitting a luthier in Santa Cruz. And I moved back to Truckee where I live now. And my friend Sparky is a luthier right down the street. So we swap things when we find new things or have ideas or whatever.
Yeah.
And in a recent get together with him, I turned him on to the foam wire cutters for releasing a neck, using that instead of the other methods. And we played with it on a guitar because I didn't have one to do a neck reset on, and he had one in his shop. So we went over and put some foam cutters in there to see how it would work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from what I've found from most of the builders that I've talked to, because when I first started learning, I talked to builders, I was like, can I come to your shop and shoot the shit and tell me what you know? And in each case, I think that the big change, when most of the big changes are the same that you would do in repair, is it easier? Does it make more sense to me to do the job this way? And then it's rare that it's an occasion that I've found where it's a huge change sonically or a huge change, with what happens in the end product of the guitar. It's mostly what's easiest and most convenient and makes the most sense and does the best for the build for me or for them.
Right.
And then occasionally you come up with something that's a holy shit moment where it's, I changed this, you should try this because all of a sudden this happened to the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
But more often than not, it seems like, hey, I did this and it was way easier to do it this way than the other way I was doing it. You should try this.
Okay. Fair enough. That works. Works for me. And was that no thanks for me, Bo?
No, that was to the Kevin Ryan strips. They suck ass.
So how do you go about that process, Bo?
What?
Or did you hear my question earlier? Or was it too long?
How do I think about it? I've tried the three main ones, the typical curved, then I went to reverse curved, and then I settled on solid linings. I think I prefer what everyone has talked about. I prefer the stiffness and what it does to the sides and sound balances off them and stuff like that. And they look cool. So I sort of a combination of science that I don't understand or try to understand, but smarter people like Trevor Gore explain it, and then they just look good.
Cool. Okay. Enough of my meddling. I'll throw it back to you, Michael.
All right. Well, we've been going for about an hour 40. I think we could wrap it up unless anybody has any closing thoughts or comments. Just one thing I wanted to point out is that Trevor in the chat said he has 30 packs of rayon side strips that are 30 years old, so they're vintage. They're certainly well seasoned. So if anybody wants to try a few, contract Trevor.
Yeah.
And yes,
Can
hey
you hear me?
Giuliano.
Hello,
Yes, can
everyone.
hear you.
Yeah.
Hello.
First, thanks to everyone. It was a nice evening for me. I am in France. Look, what I've been doing this evening is just it's just a coincidence anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, my choice for the moment, it's simple reverse curved linings. It's mahogany. I actually didn't made a lot of tests on the influence of this part on the sound of the instrument. But anyway, it for sure the first reason we use linings is a structural purpose, and I guess it is the most important, of course. But if we talk about the acoustic purpose of linings, it is for sure part of defining the boundaries that the soundboard has on its edges. And from this point of view, the stiffness is important, but the mass is maybe more important than the stiffness. It's for sure more important, because when you change the stiffness of the sides, you change the frequency. The frequency is where something is happening. But when you change the mass of this structure, you change, in fact, the quality of what's happening, because it's about mechanical matching of the soundboard with the sides, and just the mass has an influence on this parameter. And to answer to Doug, my methods, in fact, is to begin with the soundboard glued on the rims. And in this situation, the soundboard has its boundaries defined because it is glued with the sides and with linings. And I make measurements, acoustic measurements of the main frequencies, main resonance frequencies of the soundboard in this situation. In the back is not mounted still on the body of the guitar. There is no neck, so it's just really the soundboard on the rims. And this way, I really can eliminate some parameters. And by using a microphone and measurements, I can help myself to define what is happening on the soundboard at this stage and what kind of influence I can have from the sides and the linings. It is very difficult to separate the two.
You start your process of evaluating the top after it's glued to the rims, and that's before linings are put in or after linings?
No. I glue the linings on the sides.
Yeah.
Both sides.
Okay.
And then I glue the soundboard to the side.
Okay. All right.
And the linings are already there, of course.
Yeah, that's why I stopped to ask, because you had made a mention of being able to making a determination of what impact those decisions are making. So you can, from one, say, build to the next, you can decide you're going to do something different with your linings and be able to judge the impact by making that one change. You follow me?
Yes. At that stage, I am not there yet, but when I glue the soundboard, I can measure the soundboard on the sides, and I can have what is happening in that specific part of the instrument. So it is helping me to define how different type of linings impact the coupling of the soundboard with the sides.
Okay. And how many times have you decided that one change was something you wanted to evaluate?
Actually, as I introduced, I still didn't made a lot of different changement in this part. I changed a little bit the dimensions of linings, but not the material and not the procedure. So at the moment, I don't have an answer for this because I still didn't work a lot. But I guess that at the moment when I will have the need to really improve this part and choose differently, I will make some tests out of the guitar. I think that it is sometimes it is more simple when you have to choose to make some dummies, to make some prototype and use a prototype to evaluate what is happening if you change something, some parts on the system. And for example, to build two different chassis and use a smaller soundboard and evaluate differences, trying to keep everything else the same, of course.
Well, that's always the key, isn't it? Because it's,
yes, of course.
you know, I had a young guy who was building under me at a time, you know, just taking, you know, like an apprenticeship with me. And I've always given the advice that if you want to know what kind of impact something's going to have on your guitar, change that one thing. You know, and in theory, I mean, in theory, you would have to build two guitars either in tandem to one another or side by side and be able to evaluate those changes. Unfortunately, at the time, when he showed up with the next stage of his build, he had something that was like a J200 size and an L1 size, and this one had reverse tone bars, and that one had straight tone bars, and this one, and there were about 14 different differences between the two guitars. And I said, you'll never know what the impact of any one of those changes.
Yes, of course. In fact, when two guitars are finished, you can try to be as precise as possible, but you have two different instruments. So if you really want to evaluate one parameter, you have to isolate that parameter and perform some tests, if it is possible, just on the one parameter of interest.
Right.
But anyway, from my point of view, a technical approach is necessary to define this kind of details, because this is really a detail.
Absolutely. Thank you, Giuliano.
Oh, thank you all.
Thank you.
I just got one final footnote.
Sure.
It was you were talking about the fabric on the insides of the guitars. I don't know whether any of you guys have watched Ken Parker's videos, but he epoxies some fabric on the sides before he bends them to stop cracking and things. He uses like a stretch linen. So I don't know whether that's the same sort of principle, but he might be a good person to look up about that, like the fabric lining on the inside.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think if I remember correctly, and I may not, he then removes the fabric after the side is bent.
Yeah.
So it's only for the bending process.
I just wonder whether the same principles that he was talking about with the tensions on the inside and the outside of that curve would still apply if it were left in, you know? When you do that.
Yeah, I would think that it would definitely act as essentially a reinforcement in all directions because of the fabric that would help prevent cracking.
Yeah,
so,
maybe.
All right.
You got to be careful watching those videos he puts out, mostly because he'll get you to go out and look for insane tooling that will cost you an arm and a leg and will not fit in your shop because of the stuff that guy can put in his shop. It's insane.
All right. Let's see. The only other thing that I would want to mention, if Ryan, if there was any chance of you providing a link to that engineering video that you found about using the flexural Applied Forces. That might be cool to have a link to for people to watch. And then Nate Wood also mentioned that Ryan, you have a cool fabric move with your side lambs as well.
Oops, sorry, I forgot to specify which Ryan. The Ryan that I used to work for, Ryan Thurell.
I gotcha. All right. What was that move, Nate?
If I remember right, it's been, like 8 years, but I think it was 3-ply with some sort of fabric in the center when he would do laminated sides for the art shops, but those sides like never cracked. So
Yeah,
that's pretty fun to play around with.
I know that when I was at Irvin Samaji's shop, this was very long time ago. I have no idea if he does it anymore, but he was laminating a sheet of Tyvek in the middle between
that's
two.
Cool.
Yeah. Again, I don't know if he's doing it that way anymore, but that's how he was doing it at the time. So.
I also know a builder, Perch Guitars. I think it's Perch. Laminates hemp, a layer of woven hemp, like sheets of woven hemp for his middle lamination in the sides. I thought that was pretty cool for something different.
Yeah.
I'm pasting a link to the video that I mentioned earlier about compliant mechanics. It's actually a Veritasium video, but it has the it has the BYU BYU professor who talks about compliant mechanics. It's really cool if you have time.
Great. Awesome. I'll definitely check that out. I appreciate you posting that. And I think I'm going to call it good for today. So I want to thank Ryan and Isaac for joining us today. Really appreciate all your insights, and definitely learned some things. And thank you, everybody. If you guys could unmute and just say thanks to Ryan and Isaac, we'd all appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
guys. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you. And Doug, I'll just wait for you to hit the stop recording button.
Yeah, I'm gonna go do that now.
All right. Thanks a lot, Doug. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ryan,
Bye.
if you're still there, it's Burton Legit.
Burton Legit.
Legit. Yep.
Who's talking?
Trevor Healy.
Oh, hey, Trevor.
How's it going?
Legit. That's what. Legit. Okay. So it's not legit. It's not legit. It's legit.
Right. It's almost like pretend the Y isn't there because it's like legit, right? But it's just legit.
Legit. Are you close to him?
I've known him since I was in high school, and it just so happens that we both started making guitars.
Nice. So you grew up around him, same area, location?
Yeah, we were in hardcore bands.